Welcome to Set for Success, a mini-series of the University of Law podcast. Here, we speak to different alumni to gain insight into their careers and how students can follow in their footsteps. This episode, I must warn you, includes some topics which may be sensitive to some listeners. I'm Ben Weiss, and today I'll be speaking to Trevor Sterling, who is a senior partner in the Major Trauma Division at Moore Barlow. He's also chair of the Major Trauma Group and the Mary Seacole Trust, a charity which celebrates the life of the pioneering 19th century Jamaican nurse and promotes social equality. Trevor has been in the legal industry for close to 40 years. He was the first black senior partner at a top 100 firm in the UK, and he's represented clients in a number of high-profile cases. He also hosts the You Triumph podcast. Trevor's represented victims of the thalidomide scandal, people caught up in the Westminster attack in 2017, and 60 of the Jimmy Savile child abuse victims. Thank you so much for joining us today, Trevor.
Absolute pleasure.
And what a CV. I mean, we'll come on to your many achievements shortly, but I want to start by going right back to the beginning, because you had quite an unconventional entry into the law. I mean, I don't believe you went to university at first. I mean, how did your legal journey begin?
Well, I had when I say a difficult childhood, I was brought up in South London at a time where society wasn't particularly great in terms of dealing with equality, etc. So there's quite a bit of, I suppose, racism. Well, it was racism. And also there was a sort of a fairly less expectation, a lower expectation of somebody like me through my schooling. So I did underachieve, and I left school when I was around 16, 17. And it was just by chance that a careers advisor asked me in for a meeting and offered me 3 job options. And one was a tennis racket stringer, which was news to me that there was such a job, a warehouseman, and also an outdoor clerk for a law firm. And it was just by good grace that I ended up taking the job as an outdoor clerk for the law firm, which was Rowley Ashworth, which happened to be a trade union firm. And that's what bedded down all of my ideologies, but also gave me the opportunity then to try and make up that lost ground and qualify as a legal executive and then a solicitor.
And what was it you saw in that first job? What was it that inspired you about it? What made you want to pursue it a bit further?
I suppose 2 things, really. I mean, I hadn't been exposed to the whole legal profession before. It wasn't something I was familiar with. Didn't really know what solicitors did. But I found myself in an office with these incredibly bright people doing great work to help people, particularly in a trade union firm. And I suppose, I mean, that was a key thing, really. It was being surrounded by people who were doing a job which felt like it had a tremendous purpose, and that really inspired me. I also had this passion about the law. It's it's a bit like a Rubik's Cube. You look at a Rubik's Cube and it intrigues you. And that's how I saw the law. It just intrigued me, all of these wonderful problems, and you could sort of find a fix. And if you could find the fix, then you're going to really impact on people's lives in a very positive way. So those 2 things, the exposure and the intrigue, really motivated me to try and qualify as a lawyer.
I love that description of finding a fix. How did you then start going about the business of finding your own fixes and getting yourself into qualification?
Well, I suppose continuing with that metaphor of the Rubik's Cube, because I one of the things I went on to do was to learn to do the Rubik's Cube. And when you do the Rubik's Cube, you realise you do, top line, then it's sort of line by line in the corners, etc. So there's a sort of algorithm to it. And it was that algorithm that I found in law, really, which was, first of all, I started reading people's cases from start to finish. That helped me improve my grammar. I stole a dictating machine from work, and I would dictate in front of the mirror. So I guess I was creating this sort of model image in my own mind of being a lawyer. And then I started studying, and luckily the Institute of Legal Executive was about at that time. And so I would work day release or evenings or correspondence course, whatever it took, to be able to just get through those exams. And then I went on to do the legal practice course, LSF as it was, Law Society Finals, to qualify as a solicitor. I had one chance to qualify, because my firm had sponsored me for a year off, and I was fortunate enough to qualify.
Congratulations. And goodness me, when you're attending those classes, though, I mean, is there a sense that, do you stick out compared to everybody else on those courses? Is it other people who are sort of career changers? Tell me about the mix in that room.
Yeah, I mean, I often say that I spent the first half of my career conscious that I was black, and the second half celebrating it. So yeah, I was always, one of a kind in many ways. I think, in fairness, through my schooling, I was that as well. So I'd kind of got used to being the sort of minority. And it was all about really being a little bit older, more mature, just making sure that difference wasn't going to be something that left me exposed. In other words, I had to make sure I worked really hard and that I didn't sort of, accord with any stereotypes and things like that. Remember, this was the time of Brixton riots and all sorts of things were going on in society, and Rodney King. So this wasn't an easy time in society. So I just had to make sure I maintained a focus and had the self-belief to get through the exams. And each time you pass an exam, you then think, well, I can do this, and it gives you that little bit more for the next exam and then the next exam. And the hardest bit for me was what is now the LPC, because I'd never sat a whole group of exams. You had to do them in one hit back then, because I didn't do many GCSEs or any A levels. So the idea of sitting this massive exams over the space of 1 week took a lot of practice. But I'm delighted that I got through it all.
I bet. And as you say so eloquently, you get over one hurdle, and then you see there are about 10 further ones in front of you. So once you've qualified and once you've got the equivalent of the LPC, what's the next step? I mean, how did you get to where you are now?
Well, it was interesting because I'd had the year off from work, and so when I went back to work, my firm had to find work for me. And so what they did was they sent an email around saying, Trevor's coming back, so if anybody's got any difficult cases or cases that need attention, he'll have capacity, which meant that I got every single incredibly difficult case land on my desk, the kind of cases that people didn't want. And at the time it was horrible, but actually what it did was it cut my teeth on some really complex issues. So it was about knuckling down. I mean, I realized very quickly that qualifying was just the start of the journey, not the end of it. And so then it was about, delivering what was expected by my employers at that time, which was around, results on cases, fee generation, those kind of things. So it was really about learning, the business of being a lawyer as opposed to the business of qualifying as a lawyer.
Of those early cases, do any still really stick out for you in your memory?
Well, I mean, I was dealing with procedurally troubled cases. There was a point in time where a decision came about which said if you hadn't applied to set cases down within a certain time, they were automatically struck out. And at that time, this took everybody by surprise because people were happy to wait for years to set cases down for trial. So I did a lot of applications to reinstate cases that had been unfortunately struck out. So again, the thing about that was it taught me a lot in terms of advocacy, because those kind of interlocutory applications, as an outdoor clerk, you would do them for your solicitors. And therefore, I was quite able to go in before the masters, as they were back then and still are, to make those applications to reinstate cases. So that it's more of a procedural thing. I think back then, maybe quite adept at procedure.
But still having to, very early on in your career, get on your feet in front of the masters and make an argument, that must have been a real, that must really have helped you cut your teeth.
Well, I remember the first time I did it, because obviously as a black person, having to go before someone and say, good afternoon, master, I appear on behalf. It's something which would have been lost on everybody else, but for me it was, wow, I'm calling this guy master in this day and age. So it was, again, it's something which people wouldn't think about. But as being a black person in that all white space, it was just quite an incredible thing to be calling somebody master.
How do you process that at the time? I mean, what's going through your mind? I mean, because the system clearly isn't, and still isn't, it's designed with certain people in mind, but how do you deal with that practically in the moment?
Well, it's interesting because everyone just said that. That's probably the first time I've actually said that publicly. The idea that, as a black person, you have to call somebody a master. It was just one of those things. You were just so used to. Sometimes people would make comments. That I didn't expect that you would be black, or those kind of comments were more commonplace then. So you were able to process them by remembering why you were there. And I've never allowed anger to be something that played too much of a part in me, because I think that's a very negative fuel. You need a positive fuel. So you just allow it. Sometimes you comment or respond, obviously not to a master, because that was just the process. Then just having in mind, one day, hopefully, I'll be able to change this, because this isn't quite right. And I've been driven to try and change a lot of things, as you'll know, because of that mentality that I have.
And we'll come on to talk about a lot of those efforts. How did you then get to become? Because it was a really historic moment when you became senior partner, because you're the first black person to be a senior partner in the top 100 of the legal firms in the UK. Talk to me about that moment.
Well, I got a call from our chair, Helen Goatley, and it was an election. So you go into these things. The pandemic had happened. We just merged at the same time as the pandemic, so we hadn't really got to know each other from the two sides of the business that had come together. So I had really no inkling that I was necessarily going to succeed with the elections. When the call came through, it was just this sense of, wow, I've become senior partner, very privileged position. And then I guess the impact in changing history really landed, because I was, the first black senior partner. And then it was just about, how can I use this therefore as a platform, to really impact on some of the challenges and issues that I'd faced and people like me might face. And I've used it as a platform for that. So an incredibly proud moment. But qualifying as a solicitor was an incredibly proud moment, and a lot of the cases I've had are incredibly proud moments. This would probably rank right up there with the most special new firm, wonderful firm, Moore Barlow, and making history in a way I don't think will happen again. In that, I don't think we'll see somebody from 16 or 17 from my background, 40 years. This is my 40th year. My anniversary is in October. And become senior partner. I look at it with some disbelief, but I'm very proud of it.
I think it's so interesting the way you talk about immediately thinking that now you've got a responsibility to help other people up. It's not just an achievement for you, it's something that you're going to use to help other people and promote diversity in the legal industry. Talk to me about that extra responsibility. I mean, do you feel it as a responsibility?
Well, I have a mantra, which is don't just aspire to climb the ladder, aspire to be the ladder. And I think it's incredibly important, because it's lonely if you don't, because you'll always be that sort of one of a kind. And actually, I think it's really important that as a legal profession, we're representative of those that we help. And I think it's really important that if I'm able to get around the big table, that I can influence the others around the big table to understand what it is that we are excluding by not taking action, by not being more conscious of the differences. But I guess above all, the struggles that I had were struggles that I didn't necessarily deserve, just because of my social background. And I think once you get through, you have to be the ladder. You have to help pull other people through. They can learn from me. They can, hopefully achieve success premised on hard work and fairness. They're the two simple things that I advocate.
So who were your ladders?
Oh, that's a great question. So I've had a few ladders on the way. There's undoubtedly one of the supervising partners back in the day at Rowley's, John Moore. I used to read his letters and I learned his prose, the way he would articulate, etc. So he was somebody that, he never saw me as a black guy. He just saw me as me, and that was just wonderful. So I'd say he's right up there. Then there's somebody called Quillan Hurley, who, when I was at Thompson's, again, she identified and saw something in me, and she got me round the big table at my then firm. So I think they're two key people, and of course there's, excluding my wonderful parents and family, but there's Mary Seacole, who has inspired me beyond belief, and so a number of ladders, and Lisa Rodriguez, who's just been a wonderful friend at the Mary Seacole Trust. These are people that have always, tapped me on the shoulder, given me that little bit of advice, a little bit of guidance, and given me the confidence and peace of mind to be able to, take on the next challenge and succeed with it.
And how did they do that? I mean, what kind of advice were they giving you?
Well, first of all, they were listening. The one thing about if you're different, it's that sense of not being heard. So they were listening, and they were giving me the confidence because you do lack a certain confidence. That imposter syndrome is real. If you haven't been to university and all of those things, you're different and you feel vulnerable. So they would really shore me up and leave me feeling able to execute the decisions which I'd made and not worry about some of the criticism that might come. And when I joined my current firm, Morbalo, I landed with this sense of confidence and knowing who I was. And that was from all those years of guidance and support. And the wonderful thing about my firm is that they absolutely embrace that. And I've never felt exposed or vulnerable. I've always felt able to be myself. And in fact, they've celebrated my difference. And that's the key thing. Feeling heard, being listened to, and being encouraged. 3 key things.
And because of that encouragement, you are where you are, and you are making that difference. I want to talk a little bit more generally now about social mobility and diversity and why it matters. I mean, let's start with you, though. What do you bring to an organisation because of your background as a black man from South London? What diversity do you bring, and how does that help your law firm?
So my parents came from Jamaica, one of the Windrush, part of the Windrush generation, and what they experienced during the 1960s was horrific. The Teddy Boys, Skinheads, etc. And later in the 70s, when I was growing up, the level of racism, people wouldn't believe. I could be walking down the street and a car would stop. I'd be called names and chased down the road. And so if you think if that's my starting point, and I'm able to work and become a solicitor, what level of industry is there? What level of motivation is there in somebody like me? Because we've seen it firsthand, what it's like if society is unfair and unequal. So put us into positions of power where we can make a difference. We can inject this fairness into the system, but also we can relate to those that are still struggling. And as lawyers, we're meant to be able to help everyone. So the fact that we can be in many ways more relatable is incredibly important. So my background, all those difficulties and horrible experiences in many ways, although being brought up within a loving family, thankfully, has really given me a different perspective. And that perspective, I think, is incredibly important if we want to have equality and equity within our society.
I was listening to your podcast, You Triumph, recently, and there was this lovely episode with Pauline Campbell, and she put it really beautifully, I thought. Sitting in a job interview, she was talking about how she just told the interviewing panel, look, I'm unique. How many other black girls from Hackney are going to be taking part in this process? You'll get something from me that you won't get from anybody else. And I was just struck by the confidence to lean into that. And do you think that's something we should be encouraging more?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I was saying earlier on, and Pauline Campbell, an absolutely incredible interview that, because of obviously everything we heard about the Diane Abbott controversy, and being a black woman is different from being a black man. There's different issues that they have to address. So hearing her perspective was incredibly powerful. There is something, I said earlier on, for me, it was about first of all being conscious of my difference, and then something clicked and I started celebrating my difference. And the best way I can describe that is if when you find precious metals, a gold or platinum or something, that is actually special because it's rare. The more common it is, in some ways, the less unique. So that's what I put into my mind, that actually there's something special. When I walk into a room, if there's nobody else like me in that room, I'll stand out. So I must take advantage of that. Don't use that as a negative, but use it as a positive. I'm going to be probably the most memorable person if I can present as best as I can. So I just look at it as a positive feel rather than negative. However, I would much prefer to walk into a room which was full of people that were there from all different backgrounds, because there weren't systems or processes that unfortunately exclude those who are from, say, lower socioeconomic backgrounds, because there's a focus on whether they went to a Russell College Group university, etc. So there's more to be done, but people like Pauline Campbell and all the others that feature, the great major trauma lawyer, Martin Griffiths, phenomenal, again from a lower socioeconomic background. Sean Wallace, the chaser, again from a lower socioeconomic background. All have got stories to tell, and I've learned so much from doing those podcasts.
And they're brilliant listens. So once you finish listening to this one, do go and find them. And you're also really championing efforts to promote diversity through the Mary Seacole Trust, as you mentioned. So tell me about the work you're doing there.
Well, Mary Seacole, as you mentioned before, was a Crimean War nurse hero. Unlike Florence Nightingale, she was forgotten. She was Jamaican, came here, rejected when she was trying to be included in the group of nurses that went out to the Crimea. And so she went out using her own funds and was incredibly famous at the time. So her being forgotten, it was quite important that we could reinstate her to the history books. And we did, with a statue after a 12-year campaign. First statue of a named black female in the UK at St Thomas's. And one of the things that I thought was really important is that once we did that, the statue was meant to be symbolic and a platform. And so we changed the name of the charity to the Mary Seacole Trust, and we now use it as a platform to promote positivity, a society that's caring and compassionate. We have, for example, a Young Seacole Ambassadors competition where we ask young school children to identify their modern day Mary, somebody in their lives who is truly caring and compassionate, a teacher or an aunt or a parent. And we also have a diversity and leadership program where we work particularly with nurses from internationally trained nurses who can tell their stories and experiences so that they are more celebrated for their contribution to the NHS. So it's those kind of things. And somewhat, I'm really proud of this, but in last October, we launched a coin which I helped design with the Royal Mint, which is a £5 commemorative coin, which features Mary Seacole and, of course, King Charles. And I was delighted to be able to take that coin back to Jamaica 64 years to the day from when my mother came here, and say, thank you, Jamaica. You're not forgotten. You're part of the story. So, we continue to do as much as we can through Mary Seacole to promote a caring and compassionate society.
We've now got a government, of course, where one of the cabinet ministers, Esther McVey, is badged as the Minister for Common Sense and seems to be waging war on diversity and inclusion initiatives in various ways. Why do you think that's happening now? And what do you think, if anything, needs to be done about that?
Well, politics is, we're at a time now in politics where it's an incredible situation where we've got so much diversity within the government, yet it doesn't feel to me that that's necessarily representative or reflective of some of the challenges that many people from diverse backgrounds face on the ground. We've still got major issues around, social economics, where those from socially disadvantaged backgrounds still do less well. There's a widening attainment gap through our studies. So, one of the things we have to do, it's all very well and good, somebody like me and individuals trying to do things to make a difference, but to make structural change, structural difference, that requires politicians to be able to really stand up and be counted. And I think we do need more people like me, certainly won't be me, but people like me entering into the political space so we can make those structural changes.
And just in terms of the argument that's being made in government that diversity and inclusion isn't something that's necessary, I mean, what would you say if you had Esther McVey, I don't know, in the podcast right now with us? What would you say to her on that point?
Well, just to really think about those words. Diversity is not important. Well, she as a woman can go back 100 or so years and find that she would not necessarily have been able to be in the role she's in. Inclusion has to be important. There's no point in saying we want people to be able to come in, but we don't want them to be active. That doesn't make any sense. So the notion that diversity and inclusion is not important is just utterly ridiculous. You know, it's like saying that society should not be a mixed fabric. It's like saying that Rubik's Cube only needs one color. Now, no Rubik's Cube is of any value if it only has one color. And by the way, on the same cube, every color is of as important as the next. So I would say to Esther McVey, go and buy yourself a Rubik's Cube.
Certainly done you no harm throughout your career by the sounds of it. I want to turn now to your specialism as a solicitor, so to major trauma. First of all, just for listeners who might not know, what is major trauma and what does the major trauma division do?
So major trauma is, I suppose, personal injury is how most people would regard it. But when people think of personal injury, they tend to think of low value, road traffic accidents. So major trauma is our major trauma service, a specialist service that's part of the Major Trauma and Signposting Partnership, which is a great partnership which includes major trauma centres. And where patients are injured and taken to a major trauma centre, they often require legal support and legal advices, and so they're signposted through. And our speciality, therefore, is supporting people with major trauma who can bring insurance claims, but our focus is always on rehabilitation. And that's the key component in that we are rehabilitation specialists. We have a good understanding of the health and social care pathways, and we use that and insurance funding to try and improve outcomes. So it's a different emphasis and perspective from ordinary sort of personal injury cases.
That's so interesting because when you speak to non-lawyers, there's often a stereotype, isn't there, about clinical negligence, personal injury being, the phrase that's often used is ambulance chasing, that it's just about getting a payout. So it's really interesting to hear about that different emphasis on rehabilitation. Where did that come from, that emphasis?
Well, actually, it was because a close friend of mine suffered a cardiac arrest and was taken into a hospital. And I went in as a friend, and I could see the carnage around, the difficulties that the family's facing, understanding and comprehending what was going on. And I thought to myself, well, if I'd been here as a lawyer, I would have been able to do this or do that. I would have been able to help with his neuro rehab, which was subsequently required by getting funding for that. I would have been able to get him a case manager, all of those things. So after that, I decided to really embed myself within the NHS, really learn how it worked, how the pathways worked, where the gaps were, and then design a legal service which could fill those gaps. And that was the Major Trauma Service, which I launched at Moore Barlow. Incredibly proud of it. It's been going since 2016. It's had over 1,000 cases come through it, where we've really been able to make a positive impact on the lives of many.
And why do you think it is that lawyers are well placed to make that impact?
Well, I don't just think it's lawyers, but I think lawyers are in an incredibly influential position, partly because of our standing, how we're regarded and seen. We're also trained advocates in many ways, but many of us as lawyers have this deep empathy as well, particularly in my space, in the area that I work. But I also add that in certain areas of law where it is diverse, like mine, and I'm here in London, London society is incredibly diverse. So you can take somebody from society, from a lower socioeconomic background, train them as a lawyer. They're going to be pretty impactful when it comes to helping those people from those same backgrounds because they can empathize.
And that empathy is so important. I mean, what other skills would a lawyer need to work in major trauma?
Focus and being decisive. But the main thing really is, be empathetic, understand that we are providing a service. We are privileged to be in that position to have the skills and the tools to make a difference. And then we've got to, as I say, be really decisive because it is an adversarial system that we are in. And so we've got to be, able to make those decisions, act upon them, and have the confidence that ultimately you might end up having to go to court because we've got an adversarial system. But always remember that it's our job to make that journey so much easier for the client, and our focus for the client. Yeah, there's this great strapline I heard on an American website. I don't care what you know until I know that you care. Caring is the priority.
And of your experience in major trauma, do any cases stand out? I mean, without necessarily breaching confidentialities, but are there patients whose lives you can remember really changing?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a great question. But I had one case which was an employer's liability suicide case. And that was the first case of its type since 1957, which went to the House of Lords and made new law. So that's always a case that really sticks out in my mind. But then, as Croydon Tram, I live in South London, so that was a very personal and local case, and being involved with that was, hugely important. Paddington Rail crash, because it was such a high-profile piece of litigation. Again, incredibly important. So there's so many cases, but I always say that probably the most current one is the one that's really important because I haven't won it yet. And at the moment, massively invested and involved with the Wimbledon prep school tragedy, which occurred last year. 2 young girls, 8-year-olds, were killed, and 20 plus others were affected. A hugely important case because these were 8-year-olds. And we've got to make sure that the system does what it should do. That there's still been no charges or no decision around charges, and the family's been left to wait for nigh on a year, and that's just unacceptable. So, that's my most important case right now.
I mean, it's the latest in a really long line of cases where you've been working with, I guess, some victims of some of the most horrendous scandals and disasters and tragedies of recent memory. How do you approach that role? I mean, I guess a lot of people would find it very difficult to start those conversations with victims, particularly if it's victims who are coming forward after a very long time, as in the Jimmy Savile case. How do you approach those first conversations?
Someone I went to see a lady whose leg had been amputated, and she woke up and she didn't have the leg, and I'd been asked to go and see her, and she recounted back to me the first meeting that she had with me, and that's really stuck with me. She said, I just went to the window and I leant on the windowsill and I listened to her, and she had a lot that she wanted to say. A lot of emotion was coming out, and she said, and I listened, and then I said, "Don't worry, it's going to be okay. I'll take care of you." And she said that was what she needed to hear. And so I always approach it on a very, how would I want to be received if that had happened to me? I don't want someone coming and espousing all of their knowledge of law at that particular point in time. I want to know that I've got a human that cares. So I listen. And I said to that same lady, if I could promise you that things would be better, what is it you'd particularly want to do? And she said, well, I'd love to climb the O2. And so when we concluded the case, we managed to get her a really good prosthetic limb. And she, I, and her treatment, physiotherapist, etc., we all walked over the O2. It's a special thing that we can do, right? It's the beauty of being a lawyer.
How are you with heights?
Not good. But she inspired me.
I bet she did. That's so inspiring. And I suppose the next sort of stage in the process, once you do have to bring all the law in, there must be times where sometimes there's a client who you really empathise with, who has clearly been wronged, but for some reason or another might not have a claim. Maybe they would have become injured even if there hadn't been any negligence, for instance. How do you approach those conversations?
Well, as I mentioned my friend who had the cardiac arrest. He didn't have a claim, but I still knew that there were areas of support that I could give. Whether it be advice around what was going to happen with his employers and all that liaison, advice around sometimes benefits, all those things. So even if people don't have a claim, there's ways that they can be helped. And actually, one of the things I pick up on is often people. They may suffer a brain injury and the capacity issues, and then suddenly you're looking at how, you've got to get a deputy and all of those things, and you think, wow, if they'd had a power of attorney. And so there's many things that actually, although you weren't seriously injured or you don't have a claim, there are things you can do to improve the position in the event something were to happen again or in a worse way. So things like power of attorneys, etc., are really important. So we can just prepare them for future issues to make it a bit better. But there's always something that you're going to be able to do for somebody, even if they don't have a legal claim, as I say, even if it's just to listen.
And that's so powerful, as you've said. I'm an inquests nerd, so I want to ask you about them. Particularly something like the Croydon tram disaster. Again, as somebody who gets that tram all the time, that case really resonated with me. There's a view, isn't there, I think, that inquests maybe used to be quite limited sort of factual exercises, and they're increasingly becoming almost legal hearings of last resort for victims' families who maybe feel they haven't been listened to in other parts of the justice system. I mean, do you buy into that characterization of inquests? Do you think they're becoming a bit more charged? And if so, is that a good thing?
Probably the biggest inquests I was involved with were the inquests in relation to a number of contractors that worked on a gas facility in Algeria. And there was an Al Qaeda attack, and many of them were taken hostage. And so, in that situation, in the absence of a public inquiry, because they were contractors and it was a private company rather than government, actually the inquest with a widened scope was incredibly important. So I think we've got to be careful, because the inquest is usually some way down the line. And what will hold up that inquest is the delay in the criminal prosecution often. It's the same with those two young girls that I just mentioned. Because the criminal process is being so slow, everything gets held back. With the Croydon tram, if there are investigations, as there always are, the Rail Accident Investigation Branch, etc., if you're not happy with their findings, then you hope that there may be something that comes out of that inquest that will help. But I think you're right. I mean, the inquest is not there to find fault. That's not the purpose of the inquest. The inquest is to understand the cause of death, because the death was a non-natural death. And we've got to be careful not to weaponize that process by making sure that the alternative investigating bodies, whether it be the Health and Safety Executive, whether it be the Rail Accident Investigation Branch, etc., are all able to do their things effectively. There is a resource issue here, and they often do not have the resources to carry out their investigations. And the same situation with Wimbledon Prep School. The delay here, as we understand it, is partly because there are not the resources for the forensic examination to report. It takes around a year or so for that to happen. So there are a number of gaps in the system that need to be filled, which will mean that the inquest is not used as that sort of, the filler for those other failings.
And do you think, what do you think families at the moment want out of inquests most of all?
Well, what they want an understanding of what caused the death of a loved one, usually, and it's it's an opportunity to probe and ask those questions. It's just unfortunate that it's quite difficult for them to get representation at those inquests. So, but if something's happened untoward, it's not a natural death, then understandably you want an opportunity to probe and ask questions to understand what the cause of death was.
Just looking back on your career, as we've said, it's been extraordinary, and there've been so many highlights and so many really inspiring moments. But I'm going to ask you a question you often get to ask your podcast guests. What have been your pinch me moments?
Well, so I should have an answer to that, Rich, because I ask the question so often. There have been a few. So I guess if I think through, right, so qualifying as a solicitor that day, because back then you used to have to go and get the first edition of the newspapers to see if your name was in it. And I arrived a bit late, and so they'd all sold out. I was at King's Cross, and so I was walking away, and I found the results page in a puddle on the floor. And when I looked at the list of names, Sterling, my name wasn't there, and I thought, oh my goodness, I failed. And then I thought, hang on, that's STIR, I'm STER. They wouldn't be next to each other. Look further down, and there was TD Sterling. So that was a pinch me moment, because I qualified as a solicitor, and who would have thought I'd left school with no qualifications. Then there was sitting in the House of Lords in the Red Chambers. It's one of the last few cases that were heard in the actual House of Lords when we won called the IBC vehicles. So that was a huge pinch for myself moment, unveiling the statue and becoming senior partner. But in truth, I guess I won an award last year at Black Talent Awards, Lawyer of the Year, and I took my mum with me, and she'd never been to a black tie event. And so when I was called up, having won the award, and she was with me, and I'm there with her, and I thought, wow, this is what you'd hoped for, right? When you came 64 years ago to this country and you faced all that you faced. You hoped that your kids would do okay and do you proud, and this is for you, Mum. So I think that's got to be the biggest pinch of my moments.
I bet that's what a moment to choose. Turning back to sort of people who are just setting out on their legal journey at the moment, I mean, what are your top tips for people who would like to become a solicitor?
Don't aspire just to climb the ladder, aspire to be the ladder. I would say it's a career, and it's a really fulfilling career, but enjoy the journey. People chase the next level all the time. I want to be an associate. I want to be a senior associate. I want to be a partner. Enjoy each level, each rung of the ladder, because each of those experiences that you get to ask more questions, actually, the lower you are down the ladder. So enjoy it. Know that it's a marathon. So ensure you get that work-life balance. If you're a youngster in your 20s, make sure you're enjoying life. There's a lot that's going to come your way with families or whatever else. So enjoy it. So I would say each rung of the ladder, you've got to work hard, but also enjoy it. And then when you get to the top of the ladder, just remember that your job is to then be the ladder.
Absolutely. When you're meeting young aspiring solicitors, what impresses you most about them?
Well, we bring a lot into our offices, actually. We've got a wonderful set of arrangements now to bring in kids on work placements from a lot of socioeconomic backgrounds, aspiring lawyers, but also to bring in those that are more older law students, and then those that are actually working. So I love it, because our boardroom just last week, where we had a lot of law students there, was incredibly diverse. So what I've recognised is that by being out there, as I try to be, that people start thinking, well, I can be what I can see. So we get a lot more applications, a lot more people wanting to come in and to meet me and talk to me. And I love sharing my experience to give them confidence. And I get these wonderful messages where people say, right now, I believe I can do this. I believe it's possible. So that's a wonderfully rewarding feeling to know that actually somehow we're encouraging kids from all backgrounds to believe that they can join this wonderful profession.
And that, I guess, the beauty of mentoring as well is that it's two way, isn't it? I mean, do you learn stuff from them when you're talking to them that changes your work?
All the time. I mean, even with my podcast, I as you mentioned, the Pauline Campbell one, but Sean Wallace, who would have known? I mean, he's now one of the most famous quizzers in the country on The Chase. But actually, if you speak to him, he's really proud that he's a lawyer. And people don't realise he's a qualified barrister. And actually, he struggled. He got one less O-level or GCSE than I did. And he, struggled through uni. And look what he's gone on to achieve. So you just learn a lot. And the knowledge here is about people. What drives people and how you can motivate people is by understanding people. And so that's what I've learned so much more about, how the qualities that people have and what then will make them a good lawyer. And it's not whether they got a first or a 2-1, I can tell you. It's their experiences. That's what makes them a good lawyer.
And with your experiences and your knowledge and your understanding now, is there any advice you'd give to your 18-year-old self?
Yeah, sure. I would say do your A-levels and try and go to university. It will be a lot easier. You'll have a hell of a lot more evenings to yourself. So try and do it that way. But if not, I would have just the only advice I would have given me back then is, don't worry, it's going to be fine. Just work hard, believe in yourself, and keep going. It's not complex, and learn to do the Rubik's Cube, because if you can do that, you'll understand what it takes to be a lawyer. And so I can. In 1 minute, 30 seconds, that proved to be true. So that's the advice I would get. Get one of those. You learn a lot from it, because the mentality it takes to work it out is what it takes to succeed in the legal profession and generally, actually.
Which brings me beautifully to my final question. When was the last time you tackled a Rubik's Cube?
I do it every day. I have 5 or 6 of them, and I do at least one a day, because it's just really good. It's never the same every time we do it, different movements. So I do it on a day. I haven't done it yet, but that's because we, but I will do it after this conversation.
Well, look, I won't detain you any longer. I need you to get to that Rubik's Cube to set the day up. But thank you so much, Trevor, for all of these wonderful insights. It's been really inspiring to talk to you. And I know that our listeners will have got real benefit from it. So thank you.
Well, thank you for listening to me. It's been wonderful. Thank you.